was invited to a conference on the ethics of art, and Joylyn Davis was an artist who's invited to give a presentation about her work at the conference. And at the end of her presentation about her research on working with Kanak Mani Dixit on the history of looting of art from Nepal, she mentioned, well, here's a photograph of this Lakshmi Narayan statue in the Dallas Museum of Art, and here's a photograph of it before it was stolen, but we don't know what we can do. We don't know if there's any legal recourse. And sort of from the back of the room, I was like, I know, or at least I could figure it out. And I thought the best thing to do would to bring this to public attention in the US. So I did a lot of research. First of all, it took me about 6 months to be able to pronounce Lakshmi Narayan. And then I tried to pitch this story to so many venues in the US, and everybody's like, Nepal, what's that? Like art of Lakshmi or whatever, you know, I couldn't convince anybody to take it. And so I just started tweeting it out as a thread. Just, you know, with the first post of here are the two photographs side by side. And that started to like tick up in numbers. And I was working on the thread post by post, and the editor-in-chief of a New York City arts publication, Hyperallergic, DM'd me and said, stop tweeting, Erin. Write this as an article for us. So I was like, okay, wrote it as an article. The museum responded within like 24 hours to say, we're going to take this off display while we research blah, blah, blah. And yeah, things went from there. And now it's much easier to. I've done some work on objects from Iraq, which is very fun. Human remains is a huge variety of different places. I mainly focus on like investigating museums and collections in the US, and then sort of taking information to source countries and saying, here it is. If you want to do something about it, do something about it. If you don't, you know, it's. I mean, the surprising thing to non-lawyers, the non-surprising thing to me as a lawyer, is how little actual law is involved. It's all about negotiations. It's all about bad PR for museums and collectors. So I do know the relevant US laws, but it's much more about persuading authorities in the US to care about this case, to apply those laws, or persuading the museum that, hey, these laws are going to be called into play. I mean, in the Dallas Museum of Art case, they called in the authorities. They called the FBI, I think, because they weren't really persuaded they had to give it up. And then the FBI team called me and said, you know, can you help like get evidence of all the measurements and, you know, who took this photo or whatever. But some international law does come into it. So lately I've been working with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who's very active in seizing any stolen antiquities or cultural property that passed through New York, which is like most of it, because New York is a big hub. And they want to know the Nepali law. So is this count as stolen property? Is this count as illicitly exported? So, I mean, it's not really that I need to know the law. It's that I talk to Sanjay Adhikari or other Nepali lawyers and get them to tell me, here's the relevant laws, here's what they mean, and sort of navigate back and forth in translating that law into New York City legal standards. So people think that kind of you know, modern art items, paintings, sculptures, whatever, they also think the theft of antiquities. But when you think that, you think Greek, Roman, ancient Near Eastern representations of deities and religious systems where the last worshiper died thousands of years ago. And even well, that was my focus. So those belong in Greece and Rome. They shouldn't be looted, but there's nobody, you know, missing them. Mm-hmm. So when I started to think about Nepal, I was like, oh, this is the same legal system, that it's wrong to steal these, but there are victims here that aren't just sort of it's not a museum to museum transfer. It can be back into worship. And that was another part of Joylyn Davis's awareness raising project that was so powerful to me, that she was interviewing community members who were saying, this is what we lost. And so I think part of what I conceive of my role to be as an advisory member to the Nepal Heritage Recovery Campaign is making American audiences aware of that when they see these sacred objects in museums, what they should be imagining is the loss that had to happen for this object to be here in this museum, rather than just thinking this is a beautiful sculpture in the same way that, you know, a Rodin sculpture is beautiful. I think there are a lot of factors, and every case is different. Some of the factors for Nepali cultural heritage is that often the objects are, I feel like there is some word to describe the like tiny masterpieces, but precious. Maybe like they're suitcase sized, to put it more practically. So it's easier to smuggle them out of the country. It's easier to conceal the theft. Another thing is that, right, I just said it's easier to steal from storage. So many monasteries or religious communities kept artworks in closed shrines or in storage, and they would only come out once a year. So, you know, your foreign collectors could come scope out the monasteries during the holy ceremonies, and then, you know, ask for the storeroom to be broken into later. And then it would take a while for things to go missing. Also convenient is the lack of documentation. So a lot of these things started to go missing in the 60s, 70s, 80s when, you know, not everybody had a phone camera for certain. So there are just many things that weren't recorded. So it's hard to trace them now. And then I think just the trust in the police, or the lack of trust in police, and perhaps even the involvement of authorities in certain circumstances with the thefts, means that a lot of the thefts weren't recorded at the time, weren't reported, so to say, which isn't a total barrier to them being reclaimed. It's just a lot easier, because what you will see as a defense now for people who want to keep these objects is, oh, it wasn't stolen, it was sold. So see, they didn't file a police report, they must have sold it, which I know is often nonsense, but it would be easier if everybody had kept all the police reports, but they didn't. So, you know, and that can be overcome. Sometimes it just means the community has to go file a police report today about something that was stolen 30 years ago, and then it can be given back. But the accessibility of worship to all, you know, the shrines are open, or they're supposed to be open. Now, so many of them are barred because of these thefts, but that anyone can come and perform devotion means that anyone could come and snatch a thing away. And so a good thing has been transformed into an opportunity. Some of them are. Some of them have different solutions, like the Lakshmi Narayan, when it's reinstalled in Patan, it has a CCTV system. So the doors are open to the shrine. It has a CCTV and a like neighborhood watch, because let me tell you now, anytime I go near it, so like somebody swoops out and is like, you know, what are you doing getting too close to the it's not like I'm going to go inside or anything. I just want to say hi. But so I think there are solutions to the problem, but I think the biggest solution to the problem of how do you display things without them being stolen is to decrease the source of demand. And I think that is a problem for the market, not a problem for Nepalis. Well, you know, it's already happened for human remains. Late last year, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., its head issued a statement apologizing for their history of the practice of collecting of human remains, and basically saying this was absolutely horrific and racist and terrible, and we are working as hard as we can to give these back. So I think I hope museums will soon do the same for sacred artifacts. But then again, giving an apology, different than taking action or providing financial, or even not even just reparations. Like, what about funding to support provenance research, funding to support the reinstallation and care for these objects? That would all be nice, but I think it's a question of priorities. If you start talking about reparations, then I think people who might be willing to hand over the objects that they have are going to be like, oh, just kidding, I don't have anything. Because even now I've seen collectors who are willingly giving something back, just absolutely refusing to pay even the transport costs to Nepal, which is, it's real low. I think that's such an awareness thing, because you have to let people know that these thefts would be prosecuted when they're in Nepal. You have to let people know that they won't make as much money as they think they will. And to do that, you have to reduce demand, which I think is happening, but then you have to educate people about that. And I think when in other situations in other countries where you've seen decrease in thefts, especially in looting from archaeological sites, it's not just that there's been education about, don't do this because you're going to be punished. There's been alternate systems put into place so that people who are stealing these objects because they are economically desperate can instead make money through caring for these objects. So in South America, for example, there's been some microfinancing projects that have had the funds to put in a bathroom at various archaeological sites, pre-Columbian, Aztec, Mayan, whatever, South and Central America. Because why? If there's a bathroom facility there, then tour buses will stop. If tourists come, then you can, as a local, make money by, feeding them snacks or giving them tours or whatever, instead of making money by digging at the sites and selling artifacts. I think that you see the long shadow of colonial attitudes, even now in repatriation. Because it's not just that these objects were extracted by Western collectors. It's that Western museums and scholars have spent decades and decades and decades sort of lecturing people in the global South, oh, you're not as good at preserving, you're not as good at security, you're not even as good at studying these things. I know the iconography better than the community. Like, they have the wrong story about what this object is. So I think there's a sort of hangover of that attitude, a worry I have heard that some communities have that they won't be able to protect the objects. And then I think there's also a feeling in some cases of shame or maybe complicity. Again, there were locals involved in these thefts, but I think that's because they were offered enormous amounts or comparatively enormous amounts of money. And so no wonder. Or there was a pressure from officials and there's nothing they could do. So I don't think anybody should feel shame about what they did or what their parents or grandparents did. But again, that's me. Not like it has much effect. But I think that type of personal or social worry also is making these decisions kind of go askew. And so I think, the process of removal of these objects took generations. And I think the process of reintegration is also going to take generations. I wouldn't phrase it as failure. I think of it more as this is a period of experimentation, right? This hasn't happened before. So some things are going to go right. Some things people are going to move a little bit and then move a little bit. But it's very exciting that things aren't just ending up in the National Museum or in storage and then in the National Museum, which would be even worse. But there's, and I don't think a refusal of a community now means that the community will always refuse. Because sometimes you have to be the first penguin off of the iceberg to see that there's nobody going to get eaten. You know, that if the Lakshmi Narayan is still in place and it's fine now a couple of years later, I think more communities are thinking, oh, okay, like we aren't going to get arrested if somebody, you know, knocks into this or tries to whatever, you know, it's going to be okay. But it's going to be a long process, I think. They're just things that have nothing to do with Nepal that are causing it to go slowly. But it's like when you're fishing and you're reeling in a big fish and you have to go slowly to make sure you land it on that one. But there are definitely other cases where there's all the information and the museum authorities are simply delaying for the sake of delay. I think because people realize that the witnesses to a lot of these cases, the people who remember the objects in place, they are getting older. And it's going to be a lot harder to claim them if those people are no longer with us, which is why I'm really glad that the declaration after the conference had that section about, like, we need to collect evidence. We need to, you know, interview and make videos and just record people's memories so that can come into play in cases. Really working with the NHRC to see, you know, like, where do you want my help? Here's the information I have, but I'm not the person who says, this is the one we'll pursue. So I think from what I understand of the general priorities of the NHRC, they are really looking for a combination of meaningfulness to the community of this return and clarity of evidence to establish good relationships with authorities, so that when we bring in the future harder cases where, you know, there isn't a photograph of it in situ, you just have to rely on witness testimony or something, it will be easier to happen. And also, each of the ongoing cases is revealing more information about the networks of middlemen and dealers and collectors. So you might think that only one item is being claimed or only one item has come back, but that there's really all these files of information being created that will mean that, you know, maybe we haven't located the other thing that this person stole, but in 2 years it'll pop up for auction and can be claimed then once it's discovered. So it's growing momentum. So recently, a reporter in Virginia did a Freedom of Information Act request for emails from the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, from their Asian art curator, about his acquisition of a certain collection of Nepali antiquities. And it turns out that the curator had been discussing an article that I had written and called me. Really, I need to get t-shirts printed up. One of the things he called me was a rabble-rousing whippersnapper. And I also got unsolicited white savior vigilante, which would, again, make a good t-shirt. But that kind of pushback that I've gotten has mainly been from other white Americans. I have honestly been surprised at how little pushback I've gotten from people within Nepal. And I feel like people should be more suspicious of any, like, please look a white American gift horse in the mouth, because there have been so many generations of, like, scholars of coming in to look at Nepal and really, you know, either actively participating in the trade or, once objects are smuggled out of the country, authenticating and evaluating them and helping them raise the market value. So I think you need to examine everybody's activities.